The relentless rain hammered down on the streets of Chicago, turning skyscraper windows into silver mirrors and sidewalks into shimmering rivers. Ethan Caldwell, a 42-year-old real estate tycoon known for his precision and unshakable discipline, barely noticed the storm as his black Bentley glided toward O'Hare Airport. His mind was locked on the billion-dollar pitch awaiting him in Los Angeles, every word of his presentation already rehearsed to perfection. To Ethan, emotions were distractions, luxuries, for people who didn't have empires to run. But that morning, something unusual cracked through his armored focus. At a red light, he noticed a lone figure standing at the corner. A young woman, clutching an infant to her chest, her coat soaked through, shielding the baby from the cold rain, with nothing but her trembling body. She wasn't part of the polished, high-rise world Ethan inhabited. She looked fragile, yet there was an unyielding determination in the way she held the child. Something in that moment pulled Ethan back to his own childhood, a time of empty pockets and colder nights. The light turned green, but instead of pressing forward, he rolled down his window. Against every instinct, he motioned for her to approach, and unknowingly set the course for a life-altering encounter. Rainwater dripped from the young woman's hair as she hesitated at the curb. Ethan Caldwell had the window rolled down, one hand on the steering wheel, the other gesturing toward the passenger side. Her eyes flickered. Between suspicion and desperation, the infant in her arms stirred, letting out a small, restless cry that seemed to push her decision forward. She pulled the strap of a worn canvas bag higher on her shoulder, stepped forward, and slid into the Bentley. The warm air from the vents hit her immediately, and she exhaled, as if her lungs had been holding their breath for weeks. "What's your name?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice even. "Isabella," she replied, softly. "And this is Mia." Her gaze darted around the plush leather interior, clearly overwhelmed. Ethan didn't ask anything else, not yet. He noticed how Isabella's arms remained wrapped protectively around Mia, even as her shoulders began to relax. For reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't turn toward the expressway that would lead him to the airport. Instead, he veered left, toward his lakefront estate, a glass and steel structure with sprawling lawns and a view that stretched across Lake Michigan. By the time they arrived, the rain had become a curtain of silver. Isabella's eyes widened at the sight of the mansion, her lips parting as though she might ask if they were in the right place. "You can stay here tonight," Ethan said, pulling a sleek silver key from his pocket. "I'll be back tomorrow." Her hand trembled as she took it. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he replied, avoiding her gaze, as if looking at her too long might reveal more about himself than he was ready to share. "Just take care of her." When the heavy front door closed behind them, Isabella stood in the grand foyer, dripping rain onto the polished marble. The warmth, the scent of cedar wood, the sheer stillness, it all felt impossible. She laid Mia down on a nearby sofa, tucking the baby beneath a cashmere throw, then wandered into the kitchen. Gleaming countertops, a stocked refrigerator. She almost didn't dare open it, but hunger pressed her forward. Cooking eggs and toast in this space felt surreal. Every sound, the sizzle of butter, the soft click of the pan, was a reminder that, for one night, She was safe. She bathed Mia in a marble tub, her daughter's giggles bouncing off the walls, then finally let herself sink into the warm water afterward, feeling weeks of grime and fear wash away. By the time she settled into the guest room, the storm outside had faded to a gentle patter. Mia slept in the crook of her arm, and Isabella stared at the high ceiling, her heart whispering a truth she didn't dare speak. She wanted this safety to last. She didn't know it yet, but Ethan was sitting in his car outside the estate for a long moment before leaving, wondering why this act of kindness felt different, and why walking away was suddenly so hard. The next afternoon, Ethan's meeting in Los Angeles was abruptly postponed. Instead of heading to the office, he found himself steering the Bentley back toward his estate, un familiar pull guiding him. He told himself it was just to ensure his guest hadn't caused any trouble, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. As he stepped into the house, something was different. The place felt warmer, alive, in a way it never had before. From down the hallway came a soft, high-pitched giggle. Mia's. He followed the sound and stopped at the doorway of the guest room. There, on the carpet, Isabella was kneeling, holding a small stuffed bear and making it dance clumsily in front of her daughter. Mia reached out with tiny fingers, squealing each time the bear escaped her grasp. Isabella's hair was loose, her cheeks flushed with laughter. She hadn't noticed him yet, and Ethan stood frozen, struck by how utterly genuine the moment was. When she finally glanced up and saw him, her expression shifted first surprise, then hesitation. She set the bear aside and adjusted Mia in her arms. "You're back early," she said, her voice carrying a hint of uncertainty. "I am," Ethan replied, stepping inside. He reached a hand toward Mia, who, without a hint of shyness, wrapped her fingers around his. The simple contact jolted something in him, something warm and dangerously unfamiliar. Before he could say more, the sound of heels clicking against marble echoed from the foyer. A tall, elegant woman appeared, Victoria Hale, heir to a rival real estate empire, and Ethan's on-again, off-again companion. Without waiting for an invitation, she strode into the room as if she owned it. Her sharp eyes swept over Isabella and Mia, landing like a blade. "And who might this be?" she asked, her tone sugar-coated but laced with venom. Isabella straightened her posture. "Isabella, this is my daughter, Mia." Victoria's lips curved in a tight smile. "How charming." Her gaze flicked to Ethan, who stood silent but tense. "I wasn't aware you were running a shelter now." "Victoria," Ethan said sharply, but she had already turned, her stilettos clicking as she made her way back to the study. When he followed her, the conversation turned icy. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" she demanded. "Letting a stranger stay here with a child. You're a target for every con artist in the city." Ethan bristled. "She's not." "You don't know that," Victoria interrupted, her voice dripping with calculated doubt. "People like her know exactly how to play the sympathy card." Her words planted an unsteady seed in Ethan's mind, one he didn't want but couldn't easily dismiss. That night, the image of Isabella's guarded smile warred with the echo of Victoria's warning. By morning, suspicion had begun to creep in, threatening to undo the fragile trust that had only just begun to form, Ethan barely slept. Victoria's words echoed in his mind like a persistent leak dripping into an empty room. He hated the way she had spoken to Isabella, cold, dismissive, but her insinuations had lodged themselves somewhere dangerous. By the time the sun crept over the horizon, that seed of doubt had taken root. After a restless breakfast alone, he walked upstairs to the guest room. Isabella was sitting on the edge of the bed, braiding Mia's fine brown hair while the toddler babbled happily. The scene should have eased him, but instead, his chest tightened with a strange mix of unease and guilt. "Isabella," he began, his voice more clipped than he intended. "I need to know more about your situation. Everything." Her hands paused mid-braid. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze with clear, steady eyes. "I've already told you the truth that matters," she said quietly. "I didn't come here to take advantage of you." The tone in her voice wasn't defensive. It was tired. Tired in a way that spoke of years of proving herself to people who had already decided not to believe her. For a moment, Ethan's resolve wavered, but the image of Victoria's raised eyebrow pushed him forward. "I just need to be sure," he said. Isabella's jaw tightened. "Sure of what?" "That I'm not some opportunist who saw you as a meal ticket." Her voice trembled now, but her posture remained straight. "If that's what you think, maybe Mia and I shouldn't be here." Ethan's chest gave a painful thud. "That's not what I—" But she was already standing, gathering Mia into her arms. "You've been kind, Ethan. Kinder than anyone has in a long time. But I can't stay where I'm not trusted." She moved past him, the faint scent of lavender and rain trailing in her wake. By the time the front door closed behind her, the house had already lost the warmth it had gained in the past 24 hours. The silence was unbearable. Every echo of his footsteps reminded him of Mia's laughter in the hallway, of the way Isabella had looked at her daughter with a kind of love that couldn't be faked. That night, unable to focus on work, Ethan did something he rarely did. He admitted he might have been wrong. He hired a private investigator, not to dig for dirt, but to find the truth he should have trusted his own instincts to see. Days passed before the report arrived. Ethan tore it open, scanning the pages. Isabella's life, unfolded in sharp, painful detail. A promising nursing student, derailed by the sudden death of her parents, trapped in an abusive relationship, abandoned while pregnant, forced into shelters when work couldn't cover rent. No fraud, no schemes, just resilience. By the time he closed the file, Ethan's stomach was knotted with regret. He had believed the wrong person, and in doing so, he might have driven away the only two souls who had made his house feel like a home. The report stayed on Ethan's desk, its edges curling where his fingers had gripped it too tightly. Every line replayed in his mind, not just Isabella's hardships, but the unwavering dignity she had maintained through all of it. She hadn't asked for anything. She hadn't even stayed long enough to plead her case. And he had let her walk away. For a man who prided himself on decisive action, Ethan felt paralyzed. But paralysis wouldn't bring her back. He picked up the phone and called the investigator again. Find her current address as soon as possible. 2 days later, he had it. A modest walk-up on the city's south side, tucked between a laundromat and a boarded-up bookstore. It was a far cry from the gleaming skyline Ethan called home. He parked across the street, watching through the windshield as Isabella stepped out, a grocery bag balanced on one hip, Mia holding her other hand. She looked tired, but determined, her chin high against the February wind. Ethan's pulse hammered. He'd faced boardrooms full of cutthroat investors without breaking a sweat, but walking up those steps felt like wading into unknown waters. He knocked. When Isabella opened the door, her expression shifted from surprise to guarded caution. Mia peeked from behind her leg, eyes wide. "Please, hear me out," Ethan began, his voice lower than usual, almost unsteady. "I made a mistake, a terrible one. I let someone else's suspicion cloud my judgment, and I doubted you when I shouldn't have." Isabella didn't speak, her silence pulling the words out of him. "You and Mia, you brought something into my life I didn't even know I was missing. And when you left, the house felt empty. I don't want to just apologize, Isabella. I want to make this right. I want you to come back, but not as guests. As family." Her brows knit, uncertainty flickering in her gaze. Family, Ethan. Trust isn't something you can switch on after it's been broken. "I know," he said, the words quick and certain. "That's why I'm asking for the chance to earn it. No deadlines. No conditions. Just a chance." For a moment, the only sound was Mia tugging at Isabella's sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered, "is he coming with us now?" The innocence in her voice sliced through the tension. Ethan's lips twitched into a small, hopeful smile as he crouched to meet Mia's gaze. "If you'll have me," he said softly. Isabella looked between them, her daughter, so unguarded, and the man who had hurt her trust, but now stood stripped of ego. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders lowering. "One condition," she said. "No more doot. If we do this, we do it all in." Ethan nodded without hesitation. All in. It wasn't just an agreement. It was the start of something neither of them had dared imagine. When Isabella and Mia returned to Ethan's estate, the atmosphere was nothing like the first time. Back then, it had been awkward charity, a stranger offering shelter for a night. Now, every step into the grand foyer felt like the cautious beginning of a shared life. Ethan was determined to make good on his promise. The first change wasn't in the house, but in himself. He shifted his schedule, making time in the evenings to actually be present. Deals could wait. Mia's bedtime stories couldn't. He discovered that reading The Very Hungry Caterpillar with exaggerated voices could make her laugh so hard she snorted. For Isabella, adjusting to life in the mansion was both a relief and a test. She had spent years on guard, bracing for the next letdown, the next betrayal. But Ethan's action, consistent, began to chip away at her defenses. He didn't just provide a roof. He asked about her opinions on the renovation plans, invited her to help him choose art for the new lounge, and encouraged her to return to nursing school if she wanted. On a snowy Saturday morning, Ethan found himself in the kitchen making pancakes badly. The batter was too thick, the shapes lopsided. Isabella, hair pulled back and wearing one of his oversized hoodies, laughed as she tried to rescue the frying pan from disaster. "You're a world-class negotiator," she teased, "but you can't flip a pancake to save your life." He grinned, unoffended. "Guess I'll need more practice." In that moment, he realized how rare laughter had been in his life before them. The mansion had always been silent, a museum of glass and steel. Now, it was alive, full of clinking dishes, the sound of small feet on the stairs, and conversations that had nothing to do with stock performance or quarterly returns. Victoria tried once to reinsert herself, showing up unannounced in a sharp red coat, her smile as polished as her heels. This time, Ethan didn't let her past the front door. "You don't belong in this chapter of my life," he said simply, closing it behind him. The decision felt final and freeing. As weeks turned into months, Isabella began her application to finish her nursing degree. Ethan offered to cover tuition, but she insisted on applying for scholarships. "I need to do this myself," she said, and he respected that. Still, he was there for every late-night coffee run, every pep talk before an exam. One spring afternoon, as they sat on the back patio, watching Mia chase bubbles across the lawn, Isabella turned to him. "You've changed," she said quietly. "Ethan met her Hase." "No, you and Mia changed me. I just let it happen." And it was true. The man who once measured life in profit margins now measured it in moments Mia's giggles, Isabella's trust. The warmth that came from knowing his house was finally a home. By summer, the mansion no longer felt like Ethan's alone. It was theirs. The rooms had shifted from cold perfection to lived-in warmth. A pair of Mia's pink sneakers sat by the front door. A half-finished puzzle lay on the coffee table. Fresh flowers. Isabella's touch brightened the dining room each week. Ethan had built skyscrapers and negotiated contracts worth millions. But this slow, steady creation of a family was his greatest project. And unlike the others, there was no end date, no final deal to close. One golden afternoon, they hosted a small barbecue on the back lawn. Ethan's colleagues and neighbors came, but it wasn't the catered food or the lake view that caught their attention. It was how at ease he looked, apron on, flipping burgers, while Mia tugged on his leg to show him a butterfly she'd found. Isabella, laughing with a guest, glanced over at him, and in that shared smile was something unspoken, but certain. They had crossed the line from survival to belonging. Later, when the guests were gone and twilight painted the sky in lavender and gold, Ethan carried Mia upstairs. She was half asleep, head on his shoulder. He tucked her in, brushing a kiss across her forehead. "Good night, Daddy," she murmured drowsily. The word caught him off guard, hitting deeper than any accolade or title he'd ever earned. By the time he closed her door, there was a lump in his throat. He couldn't swallow down. Downstairs, Isabella was clearing the last of the dishes. He walked over, took the plate from her hands, and set it aside. She called me. "Daddy," he said softly. Isabella's eyes softened. "You've been one for a while now, Ethan." She just finally said it out loud. They stood there for a moment, the quiet between them, full of meaning. "You know," he began, "I used to think the most important thing I could leave behind was my business. But now, He shook his head slightly, smiling. Now I just want to make sure you and Mia always have this. Safety. Love. A home. Isabella reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. We have it, she said, simply, and we'll keep building it. Together? As they stepped outside to watch the last light fade over Lake Michigan, Ethan felt something he had never experienced in all his years of success, a peace that wasn't tied to achievement, but to presence. The man who had once measured life in quarterly reports now measured it in bedtime stories, shared meals, and the sound of laughter drifting through open windows. And though the path that brought them together had been messy, full of doubt, mistakes, and second chances, it had led to the one thing they all needed most: a family. Life has a way of testing the walls we build around ourselves. Ethan Caldwell believed success required distance, that emotions were liabilities, and trust was a risk he couldn't afford. But a rainy afternoon and a young mother's quiet resilience proved him wrong. The lesson: compassion isn't weakness. It's the doorway to connection. When we allow ourselves to see beyond assumptions and judgments, we open the possibility for bonds that can transform our lives. Trust may be fragile, but it grows stronger when nurtured with patience, consistency, and sincerity. Ethan learned that the true measure of wealth isn't counted in square footage or bank statements. It's found in the safety we give others, the joy we share, and the love that endures through mistakes. Sometimes, the greatest return on investment comes from taking a chance on people, not projects.